Hi everyone, it's Katrina. History is full of surprises, but what if a groundbreaking discovery rewrote everything we thought we knew? Imagine finding proof of an advanced lost civilization, deciphering alien messages, or unlocking the secrets of human longevity. Buckle up, history buffs, because today we are going to explore discoveries that could shatter the past and reshape our future. So hit that subscribe button and let's go. Pyramids of Nubia. The Sadenga pyramids are nothing short of astonishing, or at least they used to be. There were once more than 80 of these pyramids built along the Nile near Sadenga in modern Sudan. Sadly, almost all of them are destroyed. Few of the pyramids are recognizable today for what they once were: massive pyramids constructed by Egypt's southern neighbors. But just because the pyramids are broken doesn't mean they aren't spectacular. These are the surviving remnants of the last Nubian kingdom of Kush. In 2009, archaeologists found a long-forgotten piece of Nubian history. Over the next 3 years, experts unveiled the 80 ruined pyramids of Sadenga and identified them as being 2,000 years old. They were built during the Meroitic period of the Kushite kingdom. The Kushites initially ruled from Kerma between 2500 and 1550 BC. Then they were centered around the city of Meroe, famously home to the Black Pyramids. What's crazy about Sadenga is that it is nowhere near Meroe. The pyramids are 450 miles away in the middle of nowhere. What in the world was going on here? Archaeologists couldn't believe how isolated the group of 80 pyramids was in ancient times. They think the site must have been a holy place, perhaps a halfway point along some ancient trading route. There is just no other reason to build 80 pyramids in the middle of a scorching hot desert. Excavations have shown the pyramids were likely used as burial tombs for wealthy citizens. During the Meroitic period, it was almost blasphemy for a rich person to not be buried in a pyramid. Why they chose this place is still unknown. Excavating ancient sites in Sudan is tricky, which is why excavations are still incomplete. Researchers need more time and more money and more security to investigate. They think there are even more pyramids that haven't been discovered yet. This could be the biggest pyramid site in Africa. There might be enough hidden secrets to change the way the world sees the whole continent. Egypt was not the only African superpower in antiquity. The lost branch of the Nile. The biggest mystery in the history of mysteries may have just been solved, changing the past as we know it. Soil core samples from the desert beside the Egyptian pyramids have revealed a forgotten waterway. When you look at the Giza pyramids today, what do you see? A lot of dirt, right? It's true. The pyramids stand gloriously against the desert, just a stone's throw away from the modern shops of Giza, where you can get falafel and some real scraps of ancient papyrus. But this wasn't what the scene looked like 4,700 years ago. The Nile used to be a much larger beast. Egypt's great river flowed like an angry serpent through the land, and it had branches leading away into what is now dry, inhospitable wasteland. It wasn't a water park, but it was a lot wetter than the landscape now. When scientists took their core soil samples, they realized the soil came from an ancient riverbed. The river, long since dried and crumbly, used to run directly next to the ancient pyramids. Tim Ralph from Oera University in Sydney said most key monuments and cities were built either next to the Nile or one of its branches. This was how the Egyptians built their magnificent structures. They transported the blocks to build the pyramids on boats. They sailed the boats along an extinct branch of the river straight to the construction site. Did you know there were around 100 pyramids that were constructed between 4,700 and 3,500 years ago? Most are still along the edge of the Nile. 31 of them are not. The pyramids of Giza, the ones at Saqqara, and the ancient monuments of Dashur are in the western desert, miles from the Nile. Tim Ralph and his team already suspected there had been more branches leading to these desert pyramids, so he started with the soil sample, which confirmed it. Then he and his team looked at radar satellite images. With a keen eye, Tim was able to identify depressions in the landscape from where a massive branch of the Nile once flowed. Tim said the extinct river stretched around 30 miles beyond the pyramids and then moved south. It skirted Giza, Memphis, Abu Sir, Saqqara, and Dashur. It was likely 30 feet deep and more than 2,100 feet wide. Scientists have named it the Aramat Branch and are saying it was instrumental in building Egypt's most famous wonders. It likely went dry around 4,200 years ago when severe drought hit Egypt. But this solved the mystery of why all of these pyramids were built in the middle of nowhere. It's because they weren't built in the middle of nowhere. The Egyptians would use the branches of the River Nile to transport the huge stone blocks to build the pyramids. It's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Victoria Lopez and Nathaniel Wilder for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you guys. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about discoveries that could change history. There are a lot. The Ancient Wisdom of the Oera Linda. A manuscript of unprecedented power appeared seemingly from nowhere in 1867 and took Europe by storm. It's called the Oera Linda. The document was written in a vague language and filled with secrets of myth and history going back 4,000 years. When it first appeared, scientists were very excited. 19th century scholars believed the document could be a new source for information on the Dark Ages. However, not everyone thought it was real. By 1879, the scholarly community had denounced the book as a fake. That didn't stop the Nazis from using it as a source of information for their esoteric occultism. This book would become known as Himmler's Bible. I'm going to back things up a bit to 1867 when the manuscript appeared. It was first produced by Cornelis over de Linden, who claimed he had received it from his grandfather. Cornelis showed it to the local librarian of Friesland. Friesland is a region that includes some parts of Germany and the Netherlands, and that was how it got published. The book was also translated into Dutch, because since it was written in the Frisian language, not many people could read it. From the very beginning, the manuscript captured the attention of the public with its bizarre contents. It contained bits of Frisian history that nobody had ever heard of before. For example, the book described the Frisian region in Europe as being ruled by powerful Christian leaders. They won battles, prospered, and became one of the greatest nations in Europe. Frisians loved the book because it helped bolster their sense of nationalism. It gave them a history to cling on to, in which they had been the champions of the world. You'll see in a minute how the Nazis used this to their advantage and turned the book into a piece of living propaganda. There is more to the book than just Frisian greatness. It also alleges that Europe was part of a larger civilization ruled by a powerful hierarchy of folk mothers. These women were supreme priestesses dedicated to the Germanic love goddess Freya and to Jirtha, the goddess of the earth. The earliest parts of the book were supposedly written in 2194 BC. Other parts of the Oera Linda were written in 1256 AD. That's quite a big span of time. The last two sections contain a number of gaps, with large blocks of information missing. Then, on the last page, the book stops mid-sentence. Can you believe that? It's as if whoever wrote the book died from a heart attack in the middle of writing it. I haven't even told you the most shocking part yet. The book contains some information on a lost land called Atland. According to the Oera Linda, Atland was home to a mighty empire that sank in approximately 2194 BC. What's interesting is that, first of all, some say Atland was the name given to Atlantis by Swedish scholars in the 17th century. And secondly, 2194 BC was the date given for Noah's flood by Frisian scientists in the 19th century. Could this all be connected? Could this book be a real testament of Atlantis sinking? In 1922, a German translation was made of the Oera Linda, and the book started being called the Nordic Bible. It became the guidebook for members of the Nazis' paranormal division, the Ahnenerbe, which was led by Heinrich Himmler. Nazis used the book to push their occultism, since it supported the idea that Germany was at the center of a mighty civilization in ancient times. It also confirmed the existence of Atlantis, which Hitler and the Nazis believed was real. The Lost Kingdom of Ganjanagara. There is a lost kingdom in Asia that few people have ever heard of. It's called Ganjanagara, and if I'm being honest, it might not even exist. It's mentioned only in historical records as a semi-mythical Malay Hindu kingdom somewhere in modern Malaysia. The ancient texts tell us exactly where the kingdom was. It stood right on the western coast of the Malay Peninsula. The ancient texts even tell us the names of some of the kings, like the great leader Raja Ganja Shah Johan. With all of this seemingly legit info, why are there some scholars who don't believe in the kingdom? Because it's hard to separate fact from fiction. In one text, it's claimed Ganjanagara was founded by a descendant of Alexander the Great. After Alexander went to India, he impregnated some local nobility. Those women gave birth to his sons, who went on to forge their own futures with a new empire. This is an exciting story, but it's not confirmed. There are no other records that say this happened. And then there are opposing records that claim the founders of Ganjanagara were descended from the royal lineage of the Khmer. The most likely explanation is that Ganjanagara wasn't a kingdom, but a city. It was likely established by indigenous people living on the Malay Peninsula, perhaps as a merchant town. It could have been a stopover for traveling traders on their way to and from India. This ancient place hasn't attracted as much attention as some other lost cities like El Dorado or the lost city of Z, but it did attract the attention of Colonel James Low. In 1849, James went to Thailand and began to search for the ruins of the kingdom. He died within the year, never making any headway into his research. Apparently, things didn't go so well. Nowadays, experts believe the kingdom was centered on the modern village of Beruas, where recent excavations uncovered some ancient tombstones and inscriptions. Evidence points to Ganjanagara being a predominantly Muslim kingdom in the 15th century. Now, scientists are wondering if the kingdom was the first of its kind in Asia to be Muslim. If real, and there still isn't any proof it even existed, Ganjanagara may have been the strongest Islamic influence in Southeast Asia. It could have been settled by Muslims from a distant land. The Petroglyph Connection, Part 1. Archaeologists have found petroglyphs in Georgia that look suspiciously like other petroglyphs found in Europe. Could there be a connection between Native Americans and Bronze Age Europeans? This unusual link takes us to Savannah, Georgia. The Uchi tribe lived in this part of the US long before Europeans arrived. In fact, Uchi was the name given to them by Europeans. They originally called themselves the Tsoyaha, which roughly translates to mean children of the sun. They spoke a very unique language, one that's incredible to hear with your own ears. They also had a unique belief system. Their origin myth is what I want to tell you about. The Uchi Tsoyaha believed their ancestors had sailed across the ocean and settled in new land. They didn't know where they came from, only that they arrived in primitive ships and started a new society. This is a belief they have maintained for years. Richard L. Thornton is a descendant of the ancient Uchi. He is heavily involved in Uchi heritage, and Richard was even the architect for the Trail of Tears Memorial in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's helping to restore the ancient Uchi language so that it doesn't go extinct. That's pretty awesome. Richard said that when the Uchi first made contact with colonists in 1733, they told him that they too had come from across the ocean. They sailed across the Atlantic from a place known only as the home of the sun. Their first landing place was the mouth of the Savannah River. If this is true, it changes everything. It means some groups of Native Americans were, in reality, Europeans who sailed 4,600 miles across the Atlantic. Maybe some groups of Siberians did travel across the Bering Strait when it was frozen, like the history books tell us, but that's probably only part of the story. It kind of makes you wonder, how long does a group of people need to live in a place before they are considered natives? It's one of those weird, controversial questions that doesn't really have a correct answer. It's just supposed to make you think. Let's take a look at those petroglyphs I mentioned earlier. Richard has spent a lot of time studying ancient sites in Georgia. He has found rock art dating back 4,000 years. When he went to study in Sweden, Richard visited some sites on Ven Island. He was shocked. The petroglyphs carved in Swedish stone were nearly identical to the ones he had been studying in Georgia. It wasn't just the petroglyphs that blew his mind. Richard checked out some Swedish burial mounds, which looked just like burial mounds in the southeastern US and Ohio. Richard firmly believes that ancient mariners traveled from Scandinavia to Georgia more than 4,000 years ago. They settled in Georgia, interacting with the native population. Perhaps they were absorbed into the native culture. Perhaps they formed their own society, but ultimately died out. Then again, maybe Richard is wrong, and this is all just one big coincidence. Let me know any thoughts you have in the comments. The prehistoric cemetery of Sunghir. 34,000 years ago, there was no Russia. There was no country of any kind that scholars knew about. But there were humans, hunter-gatherers who roamed across the plains of what is today Moscow. These mysterious nomads left behind a cemetery that has left archaeologists speechless. The cemetery is considered one of the most important ancient sites in Europe, yet barely anyone has ever heard of it. It's called Sunghir, found decades ago in 1955. Excavations unfolded at this ancient site for 20 long years. Archaeologists found some of the earliest elaborate Homo sapiens burials ever. For example, one of the burials was of an adult male who had been covered in beads and painted with red clay pigment. He was buried with a child between the age of 10 and 12. The man and the child were put in the ground with their heads touching and their legs outstretched in opposite directions. This was undoubtedly part of a funerary ritual. Natasha Reynolds is an archaeologist at the University of Bordeaux in France. Her specialty is the Upper Paleolithic era of Europe, circa 34,000 years ago. According to Natasha, Sunghir is the oldest site on the record that shows humans exhibiting complex mortuary behaviors. This was a turning point in human society. Ancient Homo sapiens suddenly started practicing burial rituals. Those rituals are still important to people across the globe. If you're a fan of the channel, I'm sure you've heard me talk about hundreds of funerary traditions from the polar Arctic to the outback of Australia. Sending someone to the grave in ritualistic fashion is a key part of being a human. Every funeral is a ritual, and it started here at Sunghir in the Russian plains. The man I told you about earlier, who was covered in beads, must have been a very important person. I didn't tell you how many beads, which kind of makes a big difference. He had 3,000 beads in his grave that were made from mammoth ivory. He also had decorated fox teeth, ivory armbands, ivory spears, pierced antlers, and ivory discs. This guy could have opened up his own ivory workshop. He wasn't the only person buried here. Archaeologists have found 10 people at the site. Not all of them were on the same footing socially. This next part is what you really need to pay attention to. There was our friend with all of his ivory. Then there were the other people in their graves, some of them practically barren. These were the graves of people who didn't have as much status as the other guy, clearly. They were treated more harshly in death. It's not clear exactly what kind of social structure was practiced by these ancient nomads. However, scientists do suspect it was around this time that the human hierarchy began to develop. 34,000 years ago, someone decided he was king and deserved all the ivory, and nobody else could have any. It was all his, every last piece, and he would be buried with it. This may have been the beginning of countless centuries of dictators, kings, queens, and autocratic societies. Archaeology of the real Jesus. Get ready, because archaeology is revealing shocking truths about the real Jesus. By the end of this video, your faith might be shaken. The Church of the Nativity is the oldest Christian church still being used right now. It was built by Emperor Constantine in the 330s. Constantine was the first leader of the Roman Empire to convert to Christianity. He built a lot of the earliest Christian structures in Rome's territories. The Church of the Nativity is important because it was supposedly built on the very place where Jesus of Nazareth was born, in Bethlehem. Under the church, in a small grotto lit by lamps, there is a niche of marble. In this niche is a silver star that marks the exact spot where Jesus was born. If you visit here, you'll undoubtedly see pilgrims kneeling to kiss the star and press their hands against the stone. There have been excavations at the church and around it over the last 150 years. Not a single artifact has been found dating to the days of Christ. Researchers haven't even found evidence that the site was holy until Emperor Constantine said it was. As far as physical proof goes, there isn't any. Let's move to the town of Capernaum, said to be one of the first places Jesus preached his message. It's a small fishing town at the edge of the Sea of Galilee. It was here in Capernaum that Jesus met his first and most devout followers, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. One of the most shocking archaeological discoveries of the 20th century was made in this quiet fishing village. In 1968, Franciscan archaeologists excavated the ruins of an octagonal church from 1,500 years ago. Under the ruins of the old church were even older ruins. The older ruins were of a house that stood when Jesus Christ was alive. Hold on to your hats, because this is one discovery that could actually prove Jesus and his disciples were real. The house showed evidence that it started as a private home and was transformed into a public meeting place. It matches perfectly with accounts of Jesus from the Gospels. This may have been the house where Jesus met with his disciples early in his ministry. It may have been the house of Peter, where Jesus cured Peter's mother-in-law when she was ill with fever. It may have been the very place where Jesus healed the sick with his own hands. As archaeologists continued poring over the place, they found that shortly after Jesus' death, the house had been turned into his sacred place of worship. Entreaties to Christ were etched all over the walls. This didn't happen under Constantine. It happened right after Jesus was crucified, meaning his followers already knew about this house and knew it was important. By the time Constantine changed the official religion of Rome in the 4th century, the home had already expanded to be a large house of worship. It's commonly known today as Peter's house. The strange carving. In southwest Spain, an archaeological discovery has turned ideas about gender roles on their head. They found a funerary stone slab with some unexpected imagery carved onto it. The slab is known as a stela, a small funerary monument that acted like a gravestone. It was used for somebody living in Canaveral de León 3,000 years ago. Along with the stela, archaeologists found some cremated human bones. This was definitely a grave. The weird part is the stela, which depicts some facial features, hands and feet, a pair of swords, and male private parts. It also depicts a headdress and a necklace. This probably doesn't sound weird to you, but it will in a second. Because when it comes to ancient funerary images, headdresses and necklaces have always been associated with females, while words and male private parts have been associated with male warriors. This stela has both swords and necklaces. Researchers don't know if the grave belonged to a man or a woman, or maybe someone who identified as both. In a statement by the research team, they said that perhaps social roles were not restricted to a specific gender in ancient Spain. Perhaps women could be warriors, and men could hang around the village wearing headdresses and necklaces. The discovery goes to show just how little historians truly know about so-called primitive societies. The Petroglyph Connection, Part 2. The ancient Uchi of Georgia, the group Richard Thornton believes are descendants of Scandinavian travelers, were obsessed with concentric circles. Uchi priests believed concentric circles, like ripples and water, could show glimpses of the future. The Uchi drew concentric circles on cave walls. 40,000 years ago in Europe, prehistoric people did the same thing, and so did the ancient Irish when decorating Newgrange 5,300 years ago. The Metcalfe Stone is in central Georgia near the Chattahoochee River. The rock has more than just shapes carved onto it. It has symbols that look like linear A script, the ancient writing system that originated in the Minoan civilization of Crete. Dr. Joseph Mahan from Columbus State University once suggested the Uchi were the descendants of people from Crete. It was the same idea put forth by Richard Thornton, only Dr. Mahan said Crete instead of Scandinavia. Could they both have been right? Could there have been more than one European civilization that traveled to America? In Blairsville, Georgia, the Track Rock Gap site offers another mystifying piece of the puzzle. This place is covered in geoglyphs that aren't necessarily Mayan, but do share similarities. Richard Thornton pointed out that many of the glyphs resemble the Mayan god Kukulkan, who was Quetzalcoatl to the Aztecs. In the Nahuatl language of the ancient Aztec, Quetzalcoatl means feathered serpent. He was one of the most important deities in Mesoamerican cultures, regardless of what they called him. He was their version of Zeus, sitting at the head of the Aztec and Mayan pantheons. Why was he so important? Because Quetzalcoatl was the god of life. He was the lord of wisdom and light, ruler of the winds, bringer of the day, patron of merchants, and supreme deity of all living things. He was worshipped in Teotihuacan in the 1st century BC. Could belief in a feathered serpent have spread as far north as Georgia? Or do the petroglyphs at Track Rock Gap represent some other mighty serpent? Like perhaps Jormungandr from Norse mythology. He was the world serpent, son of Loki and the lady giant Angerboda. East of Roswell, Georgia is the Morgan Falls Archaeological Zone. Here you can find a large stone boat burial monument. It looks dangerously similar to other burial monuments in Scandinavia. The Tougaloo Stone at the Travelers Rest State Historic Site, also in Georgia, features a stone boat as well. This one looks more like the boats used by Minoans and Phoenicians in the Bronze Age. One side of the boat is even covered in symbols that look like constellations, suggesting advanced knowledge of the stars. I think I could keep going for ages. There's Bilbo Mound, Mohill Petroglyph, Roberts Petroglyph. All of them show styles that can be traced back to Europe. Each site enforces the idea that Europeans were in America long before Christopher Columbus. The worst winter in American history. Have you ever heard of something called the Starving Time? It was one of the worst times for the English settlers who arrived in North America. A new discovery has just added to the gruesome horror of that forgotten episode in history. This discovery is so gross and disturbing, I'm not going to give you the details until the very last second. The winter of 1609 to 1610 was not great for the settlers at Jamestown in the colony of Virginia. When winter started, there were about 500 people in town. By the time the snow cleared and the birds started to chirp, 61 people were left. This is the brutal story every American should hear about. On May 24, 1607, Captain Christopher Newport arrived in the New World with 3 ships under his command. It was initially a small group that founded Jamestown, only 104 men and boys. They chose the location for the town because it looked easy to defend. There wasn't much in the way of hunting and there was no good drinking water, but they were more concerned about staving off attacks. This was not like playing Sims. The settlers did try to farm, but they didn't know how. They couldn't grow anything, they tried to hunt but ran out of small game like rabbits and squirrels. They were almost entirely dependent on food they received from Native Americans. They also occasionally got a supply ship from England, but that was very rare. Before long, the Native Americans were sick of the English. The English had been hoping to form a commercial alliance, but the Native Americans attacked them instead. The Europeans were forced to hide behind their fortified walls. They couldn't farm because the Native Americans would come storming into their farmland and murder them. Every time the Jamestown settlers tried to farm near their fort, when they finally figured out how, the Powhatans showed up and killed them or kidnapped them. The Powhatans were the Algonquin people of eastern Virginia, and they were not thrilled about the newcomers in their lands. Christopher Newport dropped off the settlers, returned to England, and then went back to Jamestown with more settlers in 1608. Out of those original 104 men and boys, only 38 were left. Captain Christopher was shocked and a little concerned about leaving more settlers behind. Christopher did his best to reinforce the shelters and strengthen the settlement. He also set up men with weapons to guard the farm so that they could have crops. Then he left for England again. Christopher returned to Jamestown on his next voyage with a new supply of colonists. This load had the first 2 women in the colony. 2 women with hundreds of very cranky, very cold, and very hungry men. The Native Americans would not trade with them. The supply ship didn't arrive. There were also a lot more mouths to feed at this point because Captain Newport kept dropping more people off. There are not many records of what happened that winter. The colonists were a little too busy to jot down events as they unfolded in their journals. There are only around 6 written accounts of the cannibalism that took place. Archaeologists didn't find physical proof until 2013. Researchers found the remains of a 14-year-old girl who had been eaten. They found her bones scattered with the bones of butchered horses underneath a kitchen. Forensic evidence showed that her edible tissue had been cut out, such as her brain. The excavators named her Jane. She was a victim of the starving time. She wasn't the only one who was eaten. The Jamestown settlers got so hungry that they dug corpses out of the ground and scavenged their rotting flesh. It's something straight out of a horror movie. One husband killed his wife, preserved her with salt, and nibbled on bits and pieces of her throughout the winter. The discovery I'm here to tell you about today was recently made by scientists with the University of Iowa. They found the remains of 16 dogs in Jamestown. The remains showed evidence that they had been skinned and eaten during the starving time. I don't know what's worse, eating your friends or eating your dog. History hasn't exactly changed, but now at least there is evidence that the settlers did indeed eat their furry, four-legged friends. By the end of that winter, only 60 colonists were still alive. Did you learn about this in history class? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.
Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. The Emerald Tablet. The Emerald Tablet has legendary status. It's believed to be a tablet made of emerald green stone that contains the secrets of the universe. According to legend, the tablet was discovered in a cave tomb in Turkey, clutched in the hands of the corpse of Hermes Trismegistus, one of the most important figures in the mythology of alchemy. His name means Hermes the Thrice Great, so he was triple the great. Hermes Trismegistus was considered a combination of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth, and is credited with writing the Emerald Tablet, but its true source and history remain obscure to this day. In another myth, the tablet was written by the Egyptian god Thoth himself, when he divided his knowledge into 42 plates of emerald, codifying the great scientific principles ruling the universe. The legend tells that after the gods' fall, were cleverly hidden so that no human being might find them. Only Thoth, on his return to that dimension, was able to recover the mysterious book. While it's generally accepted that the text dates back to sometime between 200 and 800 AD, nobody knows for sure how old it is. The oldest known source of the writing is The Secret of Creation and the Art of Nature, an encyclopedic work that was written in Arabic during the late 8th or 9th century. But it's believed that this work was written based on a much older source that was likely written in Greek or Syriac. The original first copy of the document is believed to have burned up in the Library of Alexandria. The Emerald Tablet was heavily influential in medieval and Renaissance alchemy, but its interpretation is anything but straightforward. As an esoteric text, it was likely only meant to be understood by a small number of people. Many scientists and researchers, including Isaac Newton, had translations and copies of the document. One commonly accepted interpretation suggests that the tablet describes the 7 stages of alchemical transformation, which are calcination, dissolution, separation, conjunction, fermentation, distillation, and coagulation. You're welcome. Another theory claims that the Emerald Tablet contains the prima materia, the secret formula for the base of all forms of matter and existence. But nobody can say for sure what the work of literature describes, when or where it was originally written, or who wrote it. The reader is encouraged to find hidden truths for themselves. Hueyatlaco. Located in the state of Puebla, just 75 miles southeast of Mexico City, is what some call Mexico's most controversial archaeological site, Hueyatlaco. One of the biggest questions is, when did humans arrive to the Americas? This site might just change history. Discovered in 1962, it contains the remains of numerous extinct megafauna, including mastodons, mammoths, camels, cave lions, and smaller mammals. Some of these bones show signs of deliberate butchering, and scattered among them is an array of evidence of early human habitation, including flaked flint, quartz, and bone. Excavations carried out by Mexican paleohistorian Juan Armenta Camacho and Harvard anthropologist Cynthia Irwin Williams found tools buried in several layers of sediment, with the older and more simpler artifacts being found at the bottom, and the more complex objects near the top. It was impossible to date the items at the time, because the technology to do so didn't exist yet. Irwin Williams speculated that Hueyatlaco represents an ancient kill site that was used for hunting and butchering animals, and that it could be as much as 22,000 years old. Some experts believe it could be even older. If any of this is true, Hueyatlaco would be one of the first in a growing list of discoveries that are challenging the commonly accepted narrative that the first humans to arrive in the Americas were the Clovis people. They came around 13,500 years ago. One thing that's become clear in the ongoing debate over who got here first, and when is that we don't know nearly as much as we thought about the history of human migration both in and outside of the New World, and it will take a lot more research and exploring to get anywhere close to a definitive answer. Missing tectonic plate. Around 60 million years ago, a vast tract of what is now the Pacific Ocean, off the North American coast, was encompassed by two major tectonic plates known as the Farallon and Kula plates. Some geologists believe that there was a third tectonic plate called resurrection. How do you lose a tectonic plate? Other scientists thought that this was ridiculous. A new study claims to have found the alleged third plate beneath northern Canada, marking a major turning point in the ongoing debate. Dubbed the Yukon Slab, the suspected plate remnant bears evidence of having been crushed, reshaped, and buried through subduction over many millions of years. Using scans of the Earth's interior and a computerized geological model from the Cenozoic era, University of Houston researchers Johnny Wu and Spencer Fuston created a time-lapse animation demonstrating how resurrection may have been positioned between the Farallon and Kula plates. Named for the Resurrection Peninsula in Alaska, scientists have previously found evidence of the plate's existence, but the new findings are far more conclusive. Wu said that the suspected boundaries of resurrection during its existence match closely with ancient volcanic belts in modern-day Washington and Alaska. If the information is correct, it could help develop more accurate volcano modeling, since volcanoes form at plate boundaries. Thanks to new technology, we have made huge advancements in just the past couple of years of understanding our world a little better. He emphasized the importance of the study, citing volcanoes' role in climate change and the potential to develop more accurate predictive models based on the newfound information. This groundbreaking research highlights how little scientists truly know about plate tectonics and past movement, and the need to better understand these dynamics for our own benefit. You don't want to be surprised by a volcano. Jiroft artifacts. The antiquities market was flooded with a unique array of distinctive cultural artifacts starting in 2001, including jewelry, weapons, ceramic pottery, drinking vessels, and game boards adorned with complex depictions of animals and humans. For a long time, information about these items was scarce at best, with their place of origin listed simply as Central Asia, and some experts even speculated that they were forgeries. But some scholars suspected that the artifacts were harvested from an unknown but genuine archaeological site, and in 2002, the Iranian police caught traffickers preparing to smuggle some of the items across international lines. Investigators traced their source to the Halil River Valley near modern-day Jiroft, where recent flooding had washed away layers of sediment and revealed the remnants of an ancient cemetery, giving looters first dibs on its contents. They're usually the first ones to find stuff anyway. A team led by Iranian archaeologist Yusuf Majizadeh began surveying the region in 2003 and uncovered evidence of a vast urban Bronze Age settlement dating back at least 5,000 years, including 2 burial mounds, 2 architectural complexes, and several smaller buildings. Majizadeh's findings were initially met with backlash from some experts, who claimed that because the site had been looted, it was difficult to accurately determine the site's age and authenticity. But as the excavations continued, the discoveries of what appeared to be a previously unknown ancient culture increasingly gained credibility. Dating at least as far back as the 3rd millennium BC, the Jiroft people practiced a religion, wrote using a yet undeciphered geometric script, and created fine objects like vases and statuettes, enjoying a sophisticated lifestyle and social hierarchy for their time. Some researchers believe that they may have been a cradle of civilization, one of the first places in the world where complex urban settlements emerged. But archaeologists have limited artifacts to learn from due to the chronic looting, leaving many questions about this ancient society unanswered, at least for now, and possibly forever. Europeans in America before Columbus. A new study released several months ago claims that a collection of blue beads from Europe found in the Alaskan Arctic were traced to pre-Columbian times, suggesting that the goods reached the continent before Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492. The researchers believe that the beads were manufactured in Venice during the 15th century, and that they traveled 10,500 miles eastward through trade, crossing through Eurasia and the Bering Strait to reach modern-day Alaska. Of course, some experts dispute this exciting but kind of far-fetched theory. Archaeologist Elliot Blair said that even though the beads are old, they are not pre-Columbian. Instead, he said they were probably made during the late 16th or early 17th century. Blair conceded that even if this is the case, it still predates the earliest known contact between Europeans and Alaska natives, making for what he calls a really cool story. Danish explorer Vitus Bering experienced the first documented encounter with Alaskan natives in 1741. But if the beads are as old as Blair believes they are, it would mean that Europeans and indigenous people in Alaska had crossed paths before. Adding to this possibility are several other artifacts that were examined in the study, including twine that was radiocarbon dated to sometime between 1397 and 1488, decades before Columbus arrived in the New World. While it remains up in the air whether the beads are the oldest known European products brought to the Americas, it might be a realistic prospect. Female hunters. Around 9,000 years ago, an ancient person was buried in the Andes Mountains of what is now Peru, with a kit of stone hunting tools by their side. Noticing the extensive nature of the kit upon the burial's discovery in 2018, archaeologist Randall Haas thought the individual must have been a great hunter and an important member of society, perhaps even a chief. Haas assumed the deceased was male, but a later study proved that the remains were of a biological female, and it turns out that 30 to 50% of similar ancient burials were found throughout the Americas. These fascinating finds are the latest in a series of discoveries that challenge long-held notions of traditional gender roles in prehistoric hunter-gatherer societies. You know, men hunted while women gathered and took care of the children. Haas admitted to National Geographic that he was among the many researchers who drew conclusions about the hunter's gender based on their understanding of modern-day hunter-gatherers, who tend to adhere to a sexual division of labor. Another archaeologist, Pamela Geller, said that evidence pointing toward the contrary has been around for decades, but that it was often overlooked or ignored in favor of traditional gender roles. Now, people are taking a fresh, unbiased look at these misconceptions and realizing that it was entirely realistic for women to hunt in prehistoric societies, because they would have needed as many able-bodied people as possible to participate in a hunt. But not all experts are on board with concluding that it was common for ancient females to hunt. Anthropologist Kim Hill said that the hunting kit found alongside a woman's remains may have been buried with her as grave goods, holding symbolic rather than practical value. He also mentioned that you can't just stop in the middle of stalking a deer in order to nurse a crying baby. This topic has the academic community divided, and for now, there's no saying who's right or wrong. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Tomb KV55. Ever since its discovery in 1907, the identity of a tomb known as KV55, or the Amarna cache, has been a source of controversy among experts. Found near King Tut's tomb in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, which was part of the ancient city of Thebes, experts long speculated that the tomb's single occupant was King Tut's father, an 18th dynasty ruler Akhenaten, also known as Amenhotep IV. But KV55 was undecorated, the coffin was desecrated, and nearby grave goods were attributed to numerous individuals, making the occupant's identity questionable. It was also clear that someone had disturbed the tomb and removed some of its contents sometime between 1189 BC and 1077 BC during the 20th dynasty. In 1921, Egyptologist Howard Carter discovered several items thought to originate in KV55 while excavating south of the tomb. Upon excavation, mummy KV55 disintegrated into dust and bones, so today it's only a skeleton. Several artifacts and a genetic test performed in 2010 strongly indicate that the individual found is in fact Amenhotep IV. Further analysis showed that the person died around age 40, which is consistent with Amenhotep IV's age at his time of death. Egyptologist and archaeologist Dr. Michael E. Habicht, along with his team, created a facial reconstruction of the skull to bring it back to life. But there are lingering mysteries surrounding KV55, including the suspicion that the tomb once held an additional occupant, who several experts theorize was Queen Taye, Akhenaten's mother and the wife of Amenhotep III. This is a distinct possibility, considering the tomb contains a shrine dedicated to the queen. Now, scientists just have to put together and identify everyone else in the family and organize the discoveries from the tomb. Caral. Located in modern-day north-central coastal Peru, the large ancient settlement known as Caral is the oldest known city in the Americas. Dating as far back as 2600 BC, the sprawling site contains the ruins of temples, pyramids, homes, plazas, and amphitheaters. American archaeologist Paul Kossak discovered Caral in 1948, and in 2009 it was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but the site is in jeopardy despite its protected status. Since the 1990s, Peruvian archaeologist Dr. Ruth Shady has worked to expand Kossak's initial findings at Caral, but people have tried to stop the excavations numerous times. In 2003, someone shot Shady in the chest during an assault on the complex. Earlier this year, a group of squatters began harassing Shady and other workers at the site, claiming that the 5,000-year-old settlement was given to them during the 1970s amid the country's controversial agrarian land reform under a dictator. Believed to be from a single family, the group has invaded Caral at least 9 times since the COVID-19 pandemic began. Law enforcement has done little to intervene, and local officials have been equally uncooperative. At one point, the squatters used construction equipment to knock out walls and tear up the ground, destroying ancient artifacts before authorities and staff members stopped them. They have also issued numerous death threats to Shady and to the lawyer who represents the property, and poisoned a pet dog at the site as a warning of what's coming next. This group has no legal entitlement to the state-owned land, but this assertion meant little when local officials failed to carry out an eviction against one of the squatters, even after the order garnered police support. Knowledge of the Caral Supe civilization is already limited, and activists and archaeologists like Shady are racing against the clock to prevent any more of what the society left behind from being lost to history. But unless authorities get on board with ousting the squatters and putting an end to their scary behavior, it may prove to be a losing battle. Thanks for watching! Which discovery was your favorite? What would you like to learn more about? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!